The election is just about 20 days away, and now is the time where folks can start to really predict with much more confidence where things may be headed in November. People can send in their vote by mail and begin early voting in some states, and we have already begun to see the types of votes coming in by party registration. Unfortunately, based on the polling of this race, it's still not telling us that there's a clear frontrunner yet, and I don't think this will change much a week from now or 3 weeks from now, pending some crazy October surprise. Ever since Joe Biden stepped out of the race and Kamala Harris became the Democratic nominee, polling for her and the Democrats has only improved to the point where she now holds a steady national lead in most polls, about 2.5% advantage on average, which is just enough for folks to feel confident that she can win, right? Well, when it comes to the swing states, the states that will actually decide this election, the polling is much closer, and depending on the state, Kamala Harris has a very slim lead, or in some cases is behind Donald Trump by a percentage point or two. We've seen in the past two general elections that when Donald Trump is on the ballot, Republicans turn out and vote in ways that defy some pollsters, and has in turn created a narrative that pollsters are missing silent or secret Trump voters that can swing the election. In 2016, that was clearly the case, and even though Trump lost in 2020, the final results were closer than a lot of major polls were showing during the last few weeks before the election. In spite of that, polling today is still as accurate as ever. Although polling can vary by pollster and methodology, the best thing you can do is just average it all out and see where it gets you. Pollsters like Nate Silver and the folks who are still working at 538 all have created proprietary models that take into effect not only polls, but also certain elements of the election season, like the Democratic and Republican conventions, the debates, the economy, and any other political surprises that pop up and could affect a candidate. So, in lieu of the latest polling data we have, I've decided not to be a chicken. I've made this video because I was going to publish it last week saying this race is a tie and Pennsylvania will be the breaking point for either campaign. And while that might be true on paper still, that's not fun, and nobody wants to watch a video listening to how both sides can win because a donkey can tell you that. In lieu of the latest polling data we have, I'm going to predict that all else stays equal until Election Day, that Kamala Harris will become the 47th president of the United States. If we take a look at the 538 or RCP websites, it shows Kamala Harris has a lead, either by 2.5% or 1.7%, but again, right now what matters are the swing state polls. And if we look at those, 538 has Kamala Harris leading in 4 of them, and Trump leading in 3 of them. And RCP has Trump leading in 6 of them, and Harris only leading in 1. So, who do we believe? Well, I believe 538's modeling is closer to what will happen on Election Day, and here's why. In 2020, Donald Trump lost to Joe Biden because Joe Biden had made gains with suburban voters, especially suburban women, but male voters as well. Trump actually improved his margins with women overall and with minority voters, but what matters more is where these voters are located. Trump saw more support in 2020 in the state of Florida, which is made up of 2 million Hispanic voters. But we know Hispanic voters in a swing state like Arizona matter much more, where Biden was actually able to flip that state blue in 2020. In 2016, Trump won because he was able to draw out a large portion of low propensity voters to come out to the polls. A lot of white working class voters who felt voting never mattered and they weren't heard, and the polls missed that. Today, we know those voters exist and are a huge part of Trump's voter base. But in 2020, they weren't enough to stop a Trump loss, and in 2024, it's hard to see how they will be if the suburban vote continues to shift more towards the Democrats. Based on the 2020 and 2022 results, Republicans have seen an environment of high propensity voters, and college-educated folks are turning out more for Democrats than low propensity voters that pushed Trump to victory in 2016. Trump still has an unfavorable rating of almost 10%, whereas Kamala Harris is basically pulling even there. A big part of why Trump also won in 2016 was due to voters who wanted change or a referendum on the direction of the country. And in recent polling, Kamala Harris is beating Trump in this category, which is important. A big part of a Trump victory, if low propensity voters show up again, will be closing the margin of black voters towards his side. A recent CBS poll showed that Harris has an 87-12 lead amongst black voters, which was what they showed Biden having in 2020, yet the final results came out to be a 92-8 margin in favor of Biden. However, some polls show margins a little tighter, where black support for Harris is 78-12, and margins like that can make a huge difference in swing states like Georgia, North Carolina, Michigan, and Pennsylvania if that holds. Trump would look more like the favorite if that does hold. But we have seen and heard this story before where the pre-election polling ends up looking different and Democrats still retain an immense lead with black voters. If the polling we see today is an accurate representation of Election Day, I can see how Trump can repeat his 2016 victory. But if it's just another false flag and the polling improves like we saw in 2020, this should help Harris in the swing states. Another thing about this year's election is what matters to voters. In 2020, COVID was on everybody's mind, and the way Trump handled it turned voters off, and most likely led to his demise. In 2024, there are a few different issues, including the economy, immigration, and abortion. Right now, Trump leads Harris in polls asking who would do better on things like the economy and immigration, whereas Harris has a lead on the abortion issue. In 2018 and 2022, voters who cared about abortion as a top issue helped propel Democrats to victory and could do the same in 2024. But if the economy and immigration are too much to bear for voters, that's another issue for Harris. What we are seeing right now for the economy is that the conditions continue to get better, but is it too late? As for the border, it's a similar predicament where the Biden administration has seen border crossings come down to levels akin to the Trump administration back in 2019. But again, is it too late for voters to notice or even give credit this late in the cycle? All things considered, this is a turnout election. We will see overall turnout lower than it was in 2020 due to less mail-in votes being cast and conditions that allowed more access to vote because of COVID. But we still want to see what types of voters turn out. In my view, the 2020 and 2022 elections were precursors into the types of challenges a Trump run would encounter. And between midterm elections and special elections, we keep seeing Democrats overperform. The one foil that Trump relies on is an extremely enthusiastic base that confounds pollsters, and that is why he will always have a chance to win. But he isn't the incumbent anymore, and I believe he has to improve his voter share from the last time with an American populace that continues to see him as unpopular and too divisive, as well as more folks seeing Kamala Harris as an advocate for change. So it's hard to see where he makes up enough voters to get him over the top. With all that said, Trump can still very much win this election. I'd even give him a decent chance around 35-40%, and this prediction could be a giant fail. But that's the name of the game. Based on how I'm interpreting the data, I'd rather be Kamala Harris on Election Day. And here's how I see Election Day turning out.